What is going on, everybody? Happy,
Happy October.
yes, buddy. Happy October. Karen, what's up?
I love October. It's my favorite month. I probably have something orange for every day of October to wear. I love it.
Is it the pumpkin spice?
I do. I am a pumpkin spice fan, not beer. I don't like my beer pumpkin spiced, but almost everything else I do. I am a pumpkin spice and basic bee.
Love it. Well, it is great to be back for another conscious conversation. And this month we have a really good one, and definitely have someone as a part of this conversation that definitely lends some expertise as a resource, and just to really dig in on this topic of also not only being a conscious and resilient leader, but there's some anti-fragility as a part of it. And so I'm excited to get this conversation going, but I will hand it over to Karen that will always connect the dots on why we started this in the first place, and then some other announcements we have for the community.
Thank you. First of all, let me apologize for the technical difficulties and being late. I just want to acknowledge that some of you might have been wondering if we were going to be here today. But we're here. We have Stan. Thankfully, we are feeling resilient today and not letting it get us down at all. Going with the flow.
Right.
Stan is someone that was introduced to me by two different people in my network. I think they're both in the C3 community, the Corporate Consciousness Co-op on LinkedIn. I know definitely Dr. Laura is in our community, and she's been a panelist here before, and we love Dr. Laura. Stan and his power thinking calls that happen twice daily on Wednesday were recommended to me. He's putting his link right here for Power Thinking Corp. He is an expert in resilience, and he invites people to join him at 7:30 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesday and at 9:30 p.m., which is a tremendously long day. I guess you have to have that resilience to make it those long days every Wednesday. And he sometimes has speakers, and he sometimes sends videos, and he asks people to weigh in, and it's a nice conversation. It'll get you going on your Wednesday, get you over that hump of the week. I'm so excited to finally have Stan here, and I'm really excited that the C3 community chose this topic, because I've been waiting on that poll to come up and cover this. Absolutely, if there was any skill, soft skill, quality that has made 2020 make us feel like we need some more of it, it's resilience. To get through just the chaos of these times, the volatility of these times. And I am so excited to have you, Stan. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Karen and Lawrence, and really appreciate being here. I'm really excited for the opportunity.
So tell me from your perspective, Stan, when you go through a year like 2020, how does having resilience aid you in getting through those really hard times, whether 2020 or otherwise? And then also, can you tell me what a lack of resilience looks like in the impact of that?
Yeah, so you mentioned something really key, Karen, and that is that, we have 2020, but even outside of 2020, we have life. And we may say, hey, got through 2020, really excited, moving into 2021. And then, a loss of a job happens, loss of a loved one, just as they do, as those things happen, before 2020. 2020 just gave the entire world and all generations an opportunity to feel an adversity, a setback, major setback that we all had in common across the globe at one time. But the reality is, throughout our lives, we're going to experience setbacks and adversity. And the folks who are not very resilient are folks who could fall into a state of learned helplessness. Something that was discovered, actually was theorized by psychologist Dr. Martin Seligman, who is the founder of this new branch of psychology called positive psychology. And when he was a young psychologist in the late 60s, he kind of theorized that people can actually fall into a state of helplessness where through a traumatic event, repeated setbacks, that they would just give up, maybe not get out of bed, and just feel that there's no way that they can make it. And there's even entire communities that feel that way. And through whatever they may have experienced. So then once he, was able to prove in through a series of experiments, and folks, after this session, you can actually Google learned helplessness, and you'll learn all about the experiments that he did first with dogs and then with humans, where he did prove in that folks can fall into this state. And with the dogs, he had a group of dogs that where he would give them shocks, and then he would have this barrier. They could actually escape, and they would escape the shocks by leaping over this barrier. Another set of dogs where you'd put them in this same contraption with, and there was no way for them to escape. And they'd get the shocks and get the shocks, try to escape. And then after a while, they would just lay there and give up. And then when those same dogs were put in a different environment where they could escape and they were given the shocks, what do you think happened?
They didn't even try.
They didn't even try. And think about it. How many people have we talked to, family members, friends, where we see tremendous opportunity for them, and we try to get them to see it, and they just refuse to see it. They say, this is where I am. This is where I'll always be. I mean, I had a situation with a person who graduated from, like I did, from University of Pennsylvania, had a successful career, but a traumatic layoff. He was laid off, and he just fell into this state. And no matter what I said to him, his thought was, this is the way it's going to be for me. I'm too old. Nobody's going to hire me. I'm done. And I just have to get used to, living at a certain level now. And it was just amazing. And it's amazing the power of our thoughts and our beliefs, and how it can either hold us back and hold us into that state of helplessness, not bounce back from adversity, versus other people who have a different thinking, different set of beliefs, and they can keep moving.
I'm sure the name of the game is prevention, right? Preventing getting to that point of learned helplessness. What can you do once you reach that point?
Well, I was able to, I created Power Thinking a few years back, and I was able to acquire a company that had the intellectual property rights to the material that came out of Penn's Positive Psychology Center, which was led by Seligman. Seligman was actually a consultant to this company that I acquired. And so, I talked about him establishing that there is this learned helplessness, but then he started to study the exact opposite. If people can learn to be helpless, can they also learn optimism? And he wrote a book called Learned Optimism. Folks can pick that up. And they identified, in that Positive Psychology Center, 7 inner strengths that resilient people have, such that, and it's all evidence-based after all, decades of research. And these are common sense things. It's not, highfalutin psychological terms, but these are common sense things that we all know about. But yet they've proven that if we have these strengths at a high level, we're really strong in these areas, we can actually avoid some negative situations, or, that learned helplessness, or we can certainly bounce back faster. Most people will bounce back eventually from whatever adversity, but the stress and strain on our mental health and our physical bodies, it's just tremendous. So with these inner strengths, we can bounce back faster. We can avoid situations. We can actually avoid many of the negative emotions that we experience. And so here they are. The first is emotion regulation. That's just the ability to stay calm under pressure. So think about it, right? It's common sense. If you're more of a calm person, then you're not going to be as negatively impacted as others when adversity strikes. The next is impulse control. And that is the ability not to say or do the first thing that comes to mind, right? Next is empathy, the ability to understand another person's experiences and emotions. And after that is a huge one, and that is self-efficacy, And that is the deep down belief that ultimately you have control over your ability to succeed. That even though all kinds of other things are happening to you externally, at the end of the day, you still have control to overcome and keep moving. Related to that is optimism, another inner strength. The view that no matter what goes on, global pandemic, there are people dying, folks losing their jobs, but ultimately there's going to be a successful outcome. And there are folks that have been, despite the adversity, they're focusing on a positive outcome. We're going to get through this. We'll figure it out. The great leaders, when you think about it during the pandemic, were saying, we're going to get through this. We just have to stay calm. You usually hear this from leaders. Stay calm, right? Emotion regulation. But don't do anything rash. Impulse control. Come on, you got to believe with me that we're going to get through this. It's going to be successful. Next is causal analysis. So while all that's going on, you still want to be drilling down and getting to the root cause of the problem. Why? To ensure that we don't have a repeat of it. Causal analysis is important as well. The seventh and final inner strength of resilience is one of the most important, and that is reaching out. There are many people that feel that, hey, I gotta tough it out. I got to get through this. I'll figure it out. In fact, they don't want to talk to anybody. I'm going through a tough period right now, so I'll get back to you when things get better, when I'm feeling better. That is exactly the wrong approach. This is reaching out is actually a strength. It is not a weakness. Don't feel that if you ask for help that you're somehow a weak person. It takes a lot of strength to make that phone call and say, hey, you know what? I need some help through this, or I need, and that is one of the biggest ones. If we can, as a society, get over this notion that if I'm asking for help, then I'm weak, then something's wrong with me. We can get over that alone. A lot more people would be much, much better off. We could reduce crime. We can reduce some of the mental health challenges you're hearing about more and more nowadays. So those are the 7 strengths. And then there's skills that we help people build every Wednesday with our calls, such that when they hit these adversities, their thinking moves to how they bounce back, as opposed to getting down about the situation.
Yeah, those are huge, and I love Stan, that you brought up positive intelligence as a part of and operationalizing it, right? Because there have been a lot of things that have become normal in our society, and it's one of those, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which we all know that's a figment of imagination. And if I worked hard, you could work hard too. And it's just like, suck it up, buttercup, put some dirt on it, right? And it's just like, no, imagine if I'm hurt and I don't know how to process, like you said, emotion regulation, or that hasn't been something that I practiced, but I practiced blowing up. I practice, going into a hole or all those other things. You now need to be able to create a best next step as it pertains to getting out of it. And I love the fact that you're talking about building a community, being conscious about what I don't know about how I'm hurting, why I'm hurting, and doing that root cause analysis, which I think for a lot of people, it's the difference between creating a reality around what's real versus what we've made real. And I think over these last several years, I think we catastrophized so much in the pandemic and social injustice that resilience has been like this aspiring thing that folks are like, I don't know if I could reach it. But I love the way you just broke those down. Is like, hey, you could create character and characteristics and traits about it. And when you think about just somebody who's starting out, right? They're listening to us. They're just learning about conscious leadership because Karen has been yelling it from the rooftops about being a conscious leader. How do you help somebody who's looking up at this? Like, that's so far away. It's positive intent. Like, that seems such a big ask from where I'm sitting right now today. How do you get people to take that first next step?
Well, and I'm glad you brought it up. Many people feel that, and the challenge that I have with what I do is convincing people that this is not just a nice thing. And Karen, I've heard that term, soft skills throughout my career in the cable industry and telecom or whatever I did. There were, these solid skills that you absolutely need. And then there's the soft stuff. It's nice stuff to have, positive intelligence, emotional intelligence, leadership, the touchy feely type. Hey, that's nice stuff. We can do it. Well, I argue that is absolutely essential. Just give you a quick story. Just this morning, I used to be a deputy treasurer for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I led the Bureau of Unclaimed Property. If you ever heard of that, where people have money that belongs to them that's sitting in the Treasury. And the Pennsylvania Treasury has about $4 billion of that now.
I have some in there.
Yeah.
Under my maiden name, I can't even get it out. I can't. My marriage
we'll talk about later. We'll fix you that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The person who was my right hand and still leads that department because it was a friend of mine that needed some information. But we had a nice conversation, and she was really had an accounting background out of college and was really very focused on getting the numbers. And she didn't really have time to if somebody had lost a parent or they had and their funeral's coming up, it's like, well, look, I hope they get over that and you can get back to work. I mean, that was the attitude. And she shared with me this morning. And keep in mind, I left there in 2015 and I was only there 2.5 years. But she said, Stan, one of the things you shared was about it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens. And those times when you would say, hey, number one, that you appeared at my father-in-law's funeral, that meant so much. And then how you encouraged me to attend, the events of the employees. And I was just blown away about how they responded to that and how they were just so proud that I attended. See, these are the kinds of things. And when that happens, people will tend to want to work for you, not just because they're getting a paycheck, because they trust you, they appreciate your leadership. So to your point, these things are absolutely essential, and it's achievable. Anybody can get better. I was so taken aback when she shared that is part of how she manages now. Because one thought I had was, well, while I'm here, she'll do this kind of stuff, but hopefully she holds on to it, and she did, and she wanted to take the time to thank me for that. So the point is that I don't care who you are or how entrenched you are in perhaps a belief that this is who I am and this is how I respond to adversity. I'll go down the road, and this is an example I give of some of the skills of resilience. Somebody drives down the road, somebody cuts them off. What's the typical response? Anger. Hey, this person cut me off on the road. They did this to me, and now I'm mad, and I'm putting fists or cursing or even worse. But the reality is we could respond differently. And that's the challenge that I have. Every single human being on this earth needs these skills and needs to get stronger in the areas identified. But very few people believe that they do. Mm-hmm. They think that I'm okay. Mm-hmm. If somebody, presses my buttons, this is the way I'm going to respond. Yeah, it's wrong. And I guess I'll never get to where I need to be because this is who I am. And it doesn't have to be. It can change. But it's not going to change through, for example, a discussion. Somebody may be inspired and go, wow, that's pretty cool. I can change. And so they come away with, oh, it's not what happens, it's how I respond. But then they get out on the road, somebody cuts them off. Guess what happened? Boom. They respond the same way. Same thing, leave church. Man, that was a great sermon. I just feel so good about life, about the world. Somebody cuts them off on the road. Boom.
They don't even leave the parking lot, Stan.
Exactly. or there's an argument with the significant other. One person says one thing, they say, what? Why did you say that? Boom, 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 boom. It escalates. That's just the way I am. If they don't push my buttons, then I'm not going to respond that way. Well, the reality is that we can respond differently, but it's not going to be with just one discussion or a couple of discussions. It is a process of retraining our brains and reorienting our beliefs about ourselves and about the world around us. So what I found with doing what I do over a few years is that when people are exposed to this over and over and over again, they begin to shift their beliefs. They begin to shift in terms of how they process what is going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have so many questions building up. But before I go into my questions, I want to make sure that anybody here feels welcome to drop your comments into the chat so that Mr. Stan Green can answer your questions about resilience as well. So it sounds like what you're saying is things are automatic. You have an automatic response to things like a habit, right? Stimulus happens, you automatically respond to it. In order to shift that and become more resilient and have a different, more healthful response, you have to practice it. You have to, first, it sounds like self-awareness. This is where we start. Every single time we have these events, we always talk about self-awareness, right? First logical place to start. This is not how I want to respond. It's having an adverse effect in my life and my relationships. That awareness that you can change, the knowledge that you are able to change, instead of just saying, this is me, this is how I am. Keeping it real. We talked about keeping it real going wrong before on these events as well. But realizing that in order to have a different result, you have to change your behavior, which always goes back to your beliefs. And then forming the new neural pathways, right? Like, I'm going to have a different response, and then practicing them, making them more, you can have a different automated response to something and getting there gradually, it sounds like. So I just wanted to, I love talking about habits, and that's kind of, I'm relating it to that, like how you form and break habits. And it sounds like a very similar process to building resilience.
there's no other process.
Yeah.
It has to be a skill building process. And those psychologists have identified 7 skills, and we've proven it. With our folks, we get over 100 folks on our morning calls and over 50 on our evening calls from all over the country. And the testimonials I get back are amazing in terms of how now their automatic response is very different when they're facing various adversities than it had been before. But it took them about 4 to 6 months of repeated exposure to these skills and being part of, we just do a 30-minute call in the morning, 30-minute in the evening. In those 30 minutes, if they're doing it consistently, doing no homework, anything else, just being there. Like, for example, I gave you that car example of somebody getting cut off on the road. That's an example of a skill. There's 7 skills. This one is the skill of ABC, and this is the most powerful. And that is, A is the adversity, getting cut off on the road or whatever the adversity is. B is the belief, and C is the consequence. This is not something I made up. It was made up by or created by a psychologist, Dr. Albert Ellis, back in the early 60s. And he's one of the founders of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy that people probably heard of. And this one's super powerful. And because if you take that example, most people experience being cut off on the road. If you drive anywhere, you experience that. And again, if I said to you, the typical reaction is anger, one of the 5 big negative emotions, you say, yeah, right. And it should be, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's because people typically go from the A, the adversity, directly to the C, which is the consequence or the emotion. And in this case, anger. In other situations, it could be guilt, it could be sadness, it could be embarrassment. But we'll focus on anger for now. In the example of the adversity being cut off on the road, people go directly from A in a split second to C, from the adversity to anger. But what we have to keep in mind, and this is why this skill is so important, is that different people can respond differently to the same A, to the same adversity. So because of the belief, because of that B that's in the middle, it's not A to C. There is B that makes the difference. So the average person may say, this person cut me off, and one gets angry because of they have a belief that someone violated their rights. They did this to me. They violated me. So therefore, I'm getting them back. I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
But if that B changes to, oh, wait a minute, this person, maybe they didn't see me when they cut me off. I know I did it many times. I cut somebody off and I go, oh my God, I didn't see them. And they're like, and I'm looking out my rear view mirror and they're ready to curse at me. And I'm like, I didn't mean it. I didn't see you. Right. But their belief was that I did that to them. But if the belief changed, well, maybe the person didn't see me, or maybe they're in a rush to get to a meeting, or maybe a loved one is sick at the hospital and only has, an hour to live and they're in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Would I get angry if I believe that that was the case? No, I avoided that negative emotion altogether because I changed that belief from, hey, they did this to me, to, oh, maybe it's something going on with them.
Yeah. There's a thought leader that I follow, Vishen Lakhiani. He's the founder of Mind Valley. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that, but he wrote a book called Code of the Extraordinary Mind. And he has a publishing platform for content, all related to just human performance optimization, I'd call it, under an umbrella. But he has this term, and it's a curse word, so forgive me, but it's unfuckwithable. And one of the exercises is to, when you're angry about something, tracing it back to your belief and then coming up with 3 alternative stories that, can essentially diffuse your anger. Yeah, we jump to assumptions. And oftentimes the assumptions, not the actual facts of what happened, are what we're upset about. We had Dr. Laura on to talk about toxic positivity. And I want to make sure that we reconcile what we're talking about here with the content of toxic positivity, where we promote not suppressing or labeling or stigmatizing negative emotions, but to help people process them, move through them. How does that work with resilience? How can you be, how can you reach a state of being at peace with negative emotions and yet have a practice of resilience at the same time, or build your practice of resilience?
Well, I mean, the thing is that we have to recognize that, our brains are processing 50,000 thoughts a day. And this is one of the things that, as part of the education, we have people realize these are automatic thoughts. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to stop them. The thoughts are going to come into our minds. And usually 70 to 80% of those thoughts are negative. So you're going to have them. It's not going to stop, but it's what you do with them, that makes the difference. You talked about, how you change that situation around. I mean, so you don't avoid the negative thoughts necessarily. And you brought up, and Lawrence brought up a couple of subsets of another skill. I mentioned the skill of ABC. Another skill is avoiding thinking traps. And there are 8 thinking traps that was developed by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Aaron Beck, who's considered the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. He's now 100 years old and he lives in Philadelphia.
Wow.
And one of those, again, that was all common sense stuff. One of the thinking traps was jumping to conclusions. You talk about assumptions. We will quickly jump to a conclusion about something. And so that may not be avoidable. I mean, we do it, but this is where we have to stop ourselves and ask for the evidence. Mm. Okay, so, do I have any evidence that this is the case? And so another one that was mentioned, Lawrence mentioned, it was catastrophizing. It's one of the 8 thinking traps. The one is kind of grouped as 2 pieces of catastrophizing. We call it minimizing and magnifying. The magnifying is catastrophizing, but the minimizing is, and what we do with minimizing and magnifying is when something good happens, we tend to, okay, well that's good. But when something bad happens, something really negative, and we blow that up and it's totally out of proportion. And then a good thing can come along and it's like, well, no, yeah, that's nice, but this happened to me today and that really destroyed my entire day. Somebody cut me off on the road this morning. That's what it is. right? And we blow it up to be a major, major catastrophe. So it's not about, saying, yes, we can avoid negativity. These thoughts are going to be there. But if we know, how to put them in their appropriate categories. Oh, you know what? I just mind read. I just cut my significant other off as she was talking because I thought I knew what she was saying. And I would say, oh, you don't have to go any further. You think that's all? I said, no, that's not what I was thinking at all. Now you got this big argument going when you just fell into this trap of mind reading. And you can't avoid it. I mean, somebody says something or they may look a certain way and like, oh, they must be mad at me. No, they're probably, dwelling on the fact that they crashed their car last night, and they got to figure out how to get it fixed. And so that's another thinking trap. And there are more of them that, again, when you talk about them, when you overgeneralize, one of the big sins of, society is one painting someone with a broad brush, hey, you're Black, then this is the way it is. I mean, when I came into the Treasury and I was a director and I was the first Black director, and I got the word from the person that reported to me that she was telling her mom that they were getting a new director, and he's Black, and he's from Philadelphia. So, and mom said, "Oh well," and then she said, "But he went to Penn, University of Pennsylvania." So we have these generalizations that we make. We kind of shortcut things, and again, we have to wait and get the evidence, because if the person's a good person, they're a good person. It doesn't matter where they lived, where they came from, what they look like. It is about what's inside. And that's very difficult for us all to do, but we have to take the time. We're not going to avoid that negative overgeneralization from happening, but then we have to challenge ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to stop and not yield to the impulse control to say what we're thinking or do what we're thinking, but begin to search for the evidence.
I feel like forces are against us and more people doing that these days.
Yeah. And just what you described there, and Karen, what you brought up, and Stan, just the maximizing and the minimizing the spectrums in which we live our everyday society, right? And it could be somebody cutting you off, but it could be something as simple as somebody saying, I disagree on social media, and how that sends people into a tailspin of arguments and posting and reposting and you know what? I'm not going to be on this platform anymore. And so I'm going to shut this one down and build an account over here because they'll say they believe me and I'm masterful, whatever, for my ideas in this other space. And I think one of the things here is and I love that Karen kind of put for today's topic is resiliency, but then also this idea of anti-fragility as it pertains to engaging with resilience. And I think we've been heading in that direction, Stan, because there's something to not just surviving the season of life we're all in, but it's figuring out how to thrive. And I think it's in the challenge, as you said, that last point you were making of, okay, can we get to the point where we're challenging our thoughts? And then how do we move through this? Not avoid it, not move around it, blow it up so it doesn't exist anymore, but how do we begin to go from survive to thrive? And what does that process look like?
Great question. I love it.
Yeah. So first of all, we have to recognize that there are vehicles in place that we spend a lot of time on, that we have to begin to challenge. You probably saw something on 60 Minutes on Sunday on Facebook. And, you talk about those folks and their posts and, they disagree with each other. We were talking earlier about our beliefs, and they become now more and more entrenched. We're going to be more and more entrenched in whatever we believe about vaccines, masking, about life, about politics. If you're in this party versus, these things are now getting to be so challenging. It's not that this person believes it. It's like you are wrong and I'm right.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to fight over it. Because with social media, because their interests, just like traditional media, it's just that social media with the technology takes it to another level. They're going to keep feeding you. So okay, tell me what you believe in. And I'll know by your posts, by what you like, and so forth and so forth on. And if I want to keep you so that I can tell the advertisers I have you, for a long period of time, and guess what? As I say that, my daughter is kind of leads the global, marketing to advertising agencies and to global brands for Facebook. So, but I still love her. But the thing is, they're saying we created this thing for you, so we can get more money from the advertisers, because if people stay longer, we can show all the metrics and we'll get more. But what it does to people, it gets them further entrenched in their thoughts. So to thrive, we can't thrive in this way. We can't thrive individually. We can't thrive collectively. As you can see, we're so divided about so many things as a nation that we can't be as great as we can be, because we have people over here and this is where they're going to stay. We have people over here and it reflects in our politics and our politicians, because if they want to keep their jobs, they have to show that they're not going to cooperate with the other side, even though the things that they're working on, if they are able to pull them off, it's going to benefit everybody. But no, because you're here, I'm here, I can't show that I like you, or that I'm not even thinking about anything that you proposed. It is, we cannot thrive in that way. So as we move through, we have to continue to be, number one, we have to force ourselves to be open-minded and to consider other thoughts, opposite thoughts and ideas. And we have to then challenge our own beliefs, as opposed to staying steadfast in what we believe in, because we proclaim that what we believe is who we are, and I'm not going to let anybody challenge who I am or diminish who I am. And we have to recognize that to think about things differently doesn't mean that it doesn't take away from you. Actually, it enhances you. So if we're going to thrive, we're going to have to step out of that comfort zone, which means we have to challenge our own thoughts and our own beliefs.
Man, that's you signing people up for all kind of anxiety, Stan. Why would you say that out loud? You can't say that kind of stuff out loud, because nobody wants to disrupt comfort. Right? Because that really, to me, that's one of the biggest things that I've been running up against. And Karen, I know you've been running up against it with clients, is but I'm comfortable here. I found a blanket in community of people that agree with me. And so it's a good thing, right? We got all these factions, right? It's like social media factions. And like you said, these extremes happen, but to challenge, it goes to me and my wife were just talking about, like, all of these topics. Like, when did it stop being okay to just have an opinion? Right? And then also have your opinion without wanting to deliver it and act like you playing a game of spades with trump cards and you're like, bam, got him. Conversation over. Right? And so now it's like, can we actually be human again to each other? To say, you know what, man, I'm so glad you had a difference of opinion. I thought, I couldn't totally be right on this thing. It's just how I felt. And so how do we begin, Stan, just to communicate and hold space for each other again?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. First thing that we have to decide before we can do that is that everybody's opinions matter. And that's a stretch right now.
Yes, it is.
Because everything reinforces you being okay, and actually not only okay, but you're actually better than folks who believe differently. I'm good, you're not. And it's not that this is my opinion and I understand your opinion, let's talk about it. It's like, no, you are. Oh my gosh, I remember hearing one guy talk to another guy who was at a reception, for some salespeople, because I trained salespeople at Aflac to help them get over rejection. And somehow they got on something that would led one person to believe that he had a political bent in one direction, and he called him some flaming liberal and blah blah, and he just went in. He just went all in, and they were ready to fight. It's like, oh my goodness, why? Why? The person may have said something about maybe a person or a belief, and they were ready to go to blows. So it's going to be a challenge because folks are creating narratives around their particular stances, and folks are not budging. And we're at a point now where we can actually see things and just blow it off and say, no, I don't see that.
It feels like survival sometimes to just be like, okay, another thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the whole operationalizing plausible deniability. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that I don't know if you ever looked at any of Barbara Kellerman's work around leadership. But it was a book she wrote in 2018 called Professionalizing Leadership. And really, it was really brought the thing of politics, leaders in politics kind of came up. And it was just really like, all right, what were the examples that people were beginning to follow? And I love that you made that connection there, because people have been trained to, again, get their talking points and their bullets. And I never forget just this past, election series, particularly here in Georgia, as we were looking at, our Senate runoff debates. And one of the candidates just basically on every time she talked about the other candidate, it was like calling him a name every single time. And it was like, well, radical Reverend. And I was like, and it was cringeworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, is she going to do that all night? And it was like, yeah. And every time she went to talk and radical red. And then I was like, man, that is social media. It's like, we can't have a difference of opinion or just have a stance and say, you know what? I can honor Karen. I can understand in their difference. Here are my points that I believe are true. Here are their points that they believe are true. And then there's this whole thing going. It's like, we're going to agree to disagree. There's nothing about concessions. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, who is this about? Who is this for?
Mm-hmm.
And again, are we trying to have a winning conversation, or are we trying to win the conversation? Is where I believe a lot of the disconnect happens, is people are trying to win the conversation.
You need to put that in a comment and blow it up on the screen.
No.
People are trying to.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's really what I believe this is, and particularly as it pertains to resilience. And it's just like, if I don't translate what I'm experiencing as useful, then I'm losing. Then it's wrong. Just what you were saying, where it's this or that, not an and. I really believe we're in an and world at this point, and we're just trying to figure this out. And so Stan, I would really love, you need to blow this up to the masses. I want 100 in the morning. I want it to go to 1,000 in the morning. I wanted to go to 5,000 in the evenings when people get off to connect with you and your work.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I didn't know you were in Georgia, and I got to throw this out. I've just over the past, one of the positive things about technology is you're able to kind of really go back and, learn about your ancestors. And my great grandmother was born in 1888, and I used to spend time with her, when I was young, and found out, recently she was born in 1888, and then her dad was born in 1837 in Athens, Georgia. They were both from Athens, Georgia. So,
very cool.
And that her father-in-law was actually the slave of the then governor of Georgia. If you ever look him up, Wilson Lumpkin. And there's a Lumpkin County, there's a Lumpkin.
Cool.
So it was really interesting stuff, but yeah.
I have a couple more questions for you, Stan. Grieving. Okay. The process of grieving will throw your brain into a completely different pattern, and it's not predictable, and it's very messy. And grieving is what I identified and labeled in my students after 2020, and they had to say goodbye to the graduation that they were planning, and the events they were planning, the travel they were planning, the all their future plans, the job plans. Many of them had internships that just went poof instantly. And I was struggling to give them grace in their grief, while at the same time, my job was to impart them with skills on navigating the job search and career management. That nobody knew at that time what was going to happen with this pandemic. There was no like, it'll be okay at the end, so it's ambiguous grief at that. It's kind of like, I don't know when this is going to end. Life is different. Everything's different. Nothing's going to be like I thought. There are people actually grieving, obviously, people they lost. Many more people than should be grieving right now. Is there a trick or a skill that you can call upon to still process your grief, because it's a natural part of life? Maybe even like we were talking about anti-fragility, use that grief to become stronger.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, there are 7 skills. I went over, a couple of them, the ABC, the avoiding thinking traps. But another skill, which was very helpful, I guess, in all phases of our lives, and especially when there's grief, and what usually helps people to get over, that period. You definitely want to have folks grieve, but also to recognize that there are good things happening as well. And that is the skill of putting it in perspective. To put things in their proper perspective. And, you can't just come right out of that as people are grieving and say, well, I know this happened. However, you need to think about, it's very difficult to do. But the reality is that the sooner we can put things in perspective, then, the sooner we can kind of get on with life, because at the end of the day, we're going to be challenged with getting on.
Yeah.
And recognizing that this is not over, this thing about grief. I mean, we have a lot of experience. The longer we live, the more big changes, that we're going to see, with loss of loved ones, changes in industries. Hotel industry was pretty much devastated. Restaurants during the pandemic and the associated jobs. But if not, then it's going to be something else. I mean, the kids now are used to going to an airport and, going through security checks and so forth. And prior to 9/11, 2001, that was something that you didn't even think about. But there's always going to be something. And so there's an exercise associated with the putting things in perspective skill that helps people build, their particular skill. And it's called, it was created by these psychologists out of Penn, 3 Good Things. I don't know if you ever heard about it. And so here's what folks were asked to do. And that is, at the end of every day, no matter what's going on during that day, but at the end of the day, before going to bed, write down 3 good things that happened that day. So even in the middle of, the loss of a parent, tragically, at the end of the day, you just heard about it, and you may have been with that parent earlier that day when that happened. And so that's what we're going to be holding on to, right? This happened, and it's such a horrible thing. I know it was when I lost my mother about 13 years ago. However, there were some good things that happened that day. There may have been a loved one who had been estranged for some period of time, who reached out, heard about the loss, and reached out, and you had a conversation, and you kind of put things back on track, for a positive relationship. And that probably would not have happened had there not been that situation. But it's to write down 3 good things that happened that day, and the night will go a lot better. Then in the morning, to write down, when you get up in the morning, 3 things that you're grateful for. Because otherwise you can get into a funk and it can last for a long time. I had a person who lost her husband. She's one of our Power Thinking members. And she shared on one of our calls how, when she lost her husband, I mean, she couldn't get out of bed for weeks and just didn't want to do anything. And now, after being exposed to what we do on a weekly basis, she's very active in real estate. Again, she's, active in the community, leading some groups and just really out there. And just putting things in perspective really helped her to move forward. So that's a skill that's huge.
Thank you. Now, you put your website up. It's been a while since I signed up for your Power Thinking calls, but that's where you would go if you wanted to subscribe and get notified about the Power Thinking calls. Is that right?
Sure. Yes. On the site, they scroll down, they'll see all kinds of things, but they'll look for the reference to the Wednesday calls, and they should be able to click a link where it says, click here to get on the calls, and there'll be a page that then they can go to where they can put in their name and their cell number, and when that goes in, they will get on Tuesday nights. They'll get a video, 2 to 5 minutes, no more than 5-minute video about the subject matter that we're going to be focused on for Wednesday. And then they'll get reminders for the 7:30 call, a text reminder for 7:30 call, a text reminder for the 9:30 p.m. call on Wednesday.
Great. Now you work with individuals or organizations?
I do both. My focus is on individuals. Companies, it's just a long sales cycle, and there are too many leaders that have whole different opinions about this kind of thing. Someone will say, oh, okay, that's nice stuff. I got to do the must-have trainings. That's nice or want to have, and we may not have the budget for that. So, but for example, I've done this with Comcast, and one of the people that was part of the training leadership team at Comcast now heads up the training for a major pharmaceutical, and he wants me to do a team building for them. I'll do it. I just don't go out approaching companies.
Do you work as an executive coach, or do you work in tandem with an executive coach on building?
I don't. It's just not an area that I'm focused on.
Okay.
But I
just want to make sure that people understand how you can help them. So if they want to build the skill of resilience,
it's the individual. I focus on the individual. Gotcha. So what happens is I have these calls. They're absolutely free. If they want to become a member and have access to the library of all the calls, all the interviews, then they go to the site. They pay $9.95, and that's my business model. My next guest, by the way, on Wednesday the 20th, I'm going to have. If you ever heard the movie We Are Marshall.
Yes.
Matthew McConaughey was the star. He played a coach that went into Marshall University after they had this major tragedy. The whole football team died in a plane crash, and he came in there to revive, get them to bounce back to community, the university. I got the guy who Matthew McConaughey played, Jack Langle, who actually did that. He's coming up on the 20th in a couple of weeks. At 7:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m.
All right. Well, that's exciting. So I hope everybody joins you. Yeah, hopefully we can go from 100 to 1,000 and build the skill of resilience across many more communities. And make sure that if you're not in our C3 community right now, that you go to our C3 community and join. These are conscious co-creators. They're committed to co-creating to create a more conscious corporate landscape. And absolutely, the early bird for ConCon ends tomorrow at midnight. So if you want to get to ConCon, which is November 5th and 6th, then get your ticket today and save $200. Stan, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and spending time with our community. I really appreciate it. I look forward to being on the call, and please let me know if you see it growing. We'd love that as an outcome for your time here today.
Fantastic. Karen, thank you very much. Lawrence, it was great. Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thank you so much, Stan. And again, y'all connect with the C3 community and always keep checking the messages to vote on our next topic. And if you desire to be a guest with us, please direct message us. Join the C3 community is always the best way to stay connected and up to date on any announcements. So until next time, folks, be kind, be well, and be resilient. Have a great one.